The story begins with Melanie and Ludo in bed just before dawn. Melanie is worried that she hasn't heard her daughter cry all night after she put her down. Although she expresses her concerns to her husband, he simply tells her not to worry. Considering it for a few seconds, Melanie gets up and checks on her child, informing Ludo jokingly that she is still breathing. Melanie then gets dressed and tells her husband that she is going for a run. A few hours later, Ludo is shocked awake by the time and hurries to get his infant daughter quietly enjoying herself in her crib. Suddenly, Ludo hears a knock and opens the door only to be informed by his detective partner that his wife has been found dead on the beach. Lud is left shocked standing by the door, unable to process the horrible information. 27 years later, Ledu is investigating another murder at the same beach his wife was found in. After questioning everyone on the scene, Ludo and his partner Nathan go to the station to contact the victim's relatives. Ludo then goes to the special VR room in the station, which they use to construct satellite images of crime scenes. Putting on the special glasses that let him see the details, Ludo activates the program and starts going through it scene by scene. Suddenly, the program malfunctions and all of the images freeze. Confused, Ludo looks around to see what is going on and is shocked by the translucent image of his wife jogging on the beach like she used to do. As he stared, he started to notice her form solidify. Startled, Ludo calls out her name and she turns around, seemingly responsive. Eager to reach her, Ludo rushes forward but is hindered by the room's boundaries. He returns to the control room, where the case files are processed, and questions Agatha, the programmer, about the possibility of displaying two cases from the same location in the VR. However, she assures him that it is not possible. Thinking he might have just made a mistake, Lud leaves the incident to coincidence and heads home. When he arrives, he finds the wife he remarried, Parvana, his oldest daughter from his dead wife, Juliet, and his young son, Sam, sitting around the dinner table having a meal. After some quality time with his family, Ludo tries to go to bed but is unable to let go of what he saw earlier that day. Returning to the station, Ludo activates the VR program of the previous case and is shocked to find his wife sitting alone on the beach. Approaching her, he speaks to her and is surprised when she responds. Ludo asks his wife what she thinks the time and date are, finding out that she thought she existed at the time she died and is unable to recognize her husband as he had aged too much. Although Ludo tries to convince her by telling her about their life, Melanie has a hard time believing him, so he gives her signs to look for when she returns home. Feeling frightened by what she heard, Melanie rushes home to her husband and child, unable to stop thinking about what the man implying that he was her husband had said. She tries to question young Ludo about the incident, but he jokingly tells her that she must have convinced him with someone else. The following morning, Melanie returns to the beach and finds old Ludo waiting for her. When she asks him how he knows all the things in her house, he tries to explain to her that they aren't in the same time and space. He explains that they might have accidentally opened a rift between his time and hers. Ludo gently explains that she had died running on the cliff after accidentally falling and expresses how much he had missed her. Attempting to see if they could change Melanie's future by changing her past, Ludo tells her not to go to their friend's house that night to see if she would disappear from the group picture they took together. Now, fully believing him, the two agreed to meet there after midnight to see if they were right. Leaving the VR room, Ludo heads out to meet his partner so they can speak to the previous victim's sister. After the interview, Ludo finds out that the case is a suicide but doesn't want it closed for fear that he might lose touch with Melanie and has it reopened a bit longer. Later, Ludo acquires Melanie's file in secret and tells his partner about his recent discovery. Thinking that his friend was going through a hard time because of their recent case, Nathan agrees to let him continue investigating for a little while. That night, Ludo goes home and checks the old group picture he had taken with Melanie and is ecstatic when he finds out she has disappeared from it, proving that their plan could work. Rushing to the station, Ludo informs her about what he had discovered, telling her that they could save her life after all. The following morning, Ludo goes to work and checks Melanie's case file and finds out the day of her death has changed, making it 2 days before the first one. When he informs her of his findings, she is devastated, thinking that there is no way to change her fate. Melanie asked him if he could show her the file as well as the pictures included in it. Taking a better look, she notices that in one of the pictures, she is wearing a ring that never belonged to her, which they both find strange. Eager to decipher the latest clue, Ludo visits Nathan's house and is astonished to discover that his friend's life has undergone a complete transformation. Nathan is no longer married to Melanie's friend due to alterations made in the past. Realizing what this could mean, Ludo rushes back to his house to check on his family and is happy to see they still exist. But as he sat next to them, he realized that if he managed to save his dead wife, he wouldn't have this family anymore. That night, Melanie is waiting for Ludo at their usual spot at midnight when she is startled by the district attorney who works in her division. Confused at his sudden appearance, she asks what he was doing there, and he tells her that he liked jogging at that time, offering that they could do it together sometime. Feeling uneasy and let down by Ludo's tardiness, Melanie abruptly ends their interaction and departs. Ludo arrives later, filled with self-disappointment for missing Melanie. He spends the night at the beach, only to be awakened by his daughter, who is wearing the unfamiliar ring found on Melanie's deceased body. When Ludo inquires about its origin, Juliet reveals that it had always been among her mother's belongings. Putting the clues together, Ludo realizes that Melanie had been murdered all those years ago, but the same man who had killed the recent victim. Ludo discloses this information to his daughter, which devastates her. Promising his daughter that he will find the murderer, Ludo goes to the station and informs his colleagues of his new discovery about his wife's death, mentioning that they found the same ring in the hands of the recent victim. After his friends agree to help him, the group informs their chef, who allows them to continue the investigation but tells Ludo to step down because of his wife's case, which he refuses. Returning to the VR, Ludo tells Melanie how much the things they're changing in the past were creating a butterfly effect in his time, explaining that he could lose his wife and child of 15 years. Although she is saddened by the news, Melanie understands that he had to rebuild his life after she died. Ludo explains to Melanie that if she survives, then she must leave him on the day she was supposed to die so he doesn't lose his family. Agreeing with the idea, the two begin their investigation. For the next few days, Melanie works tirelessly to help Ludo find out the murderer. One night, as she is working late in her office, the district attorney, who seems to have an attraction toward her, interrupts her work, but she coldly refuses his advances. The following day, Melanie gathers to watch a soccer game with her friends and family, but doesn't seem interested, feeling the impending doom get closer. In 2025, Ludo discovers another old case similar to his wife and begins to look into it. Feeling like he has finally found a good lead, Ludo goes home and makes dinner for his family, and they have a good time. In her timeline, Melanie struggles with the idea of her husband having another family after she survives. Remembering the name and story of how Ludo met Parvana, an immigrant at the time, she uses her powers to get the woman to be called for investigation, but to her shock, she finds out that her husband was the only available cop to lead the case. After seeing the risk she was putting in his future, Melanie feels bad and asks young Ludo to stop the investigation, explaining that she made a mistake. Although he is confused about the sudden change of mind, Ludo accepts her request. Returning to the office, Melanie tries to convince her friend Florence to meet Nathan, knowing that they were supposed to end up as a couple. Leaving work early, Melanie tracks down the man Ludo is convinced is her murderer and attempts to have his girlfriend have him arrested for assault. When the plan doesn't work, she confronts him herself, which aggravates the man who beats her up. In 2025, Ludo is getting close to solving his wife's murder. After discovering a new lead that linked a criminal to a jewelry store owner's son, Ludo and Nathan go to the store where they find the same design of all three rings that have been being sold since the death of his wife. Although the two detectives try to speak to the owner, the concerned mother refuses to give up her son's number. Angry at the woman's stubbornness, Ludo goes back to the station and speaks to Melanie to discuss how they can have him arrested before he has a chance to kill her. After their conversation, Ludo is called to the chief's office for his bad conduct with a civilian and sent home for the day. When Ludo gets home, he is unable to find his family anywhere in sight and realizes that they must have changed something crucial in the past that prevented him from meeting Parvana. When he rushes into his daughter's room, he finds Juliet has turned into a drug addict who doesn't leave her room. Panicking, Ludo calls the hospital his wife used to work at and finds out Parvana was not married. Rushing over there, he tries to speak to her, but realizes that she has no recollection of him. Unable to believe what was happening, Ludo passes out. After waking up and collecting himself, Ludo gets a call and finds out the man they were searching for is not relevant because Melanie had already reported him before she had died, changing his whole theory. Devastated by everything he was experiencing, Ludo goes into the VR and explains what had happened in his timeline, telling her that he had lost his family. While he's crying, he notices the shock in her face and asks her if she has done something. Feeling guilty about what she had done, Melanie confesses that she had Parvana brought in for investigation. Angry at her betrayal, Ludo tells her that she ruined his life and their daughter, then warns her to do whatever it takes to bring his family back. Feeling horrible about what she had done, Melanie speaks to her friend about finding Parvana after she had changed apartments because of the interview. After getting a tip from her friend on where Parvana might be, Melanie tracks her down and convinces her to return to her apartment, promising to help her with her residence. In his timeline, Ludo goes to see his wife at the hospital and is shocked to see that she knows who he is once again, proving that Melanie has succeeded in restoring his life. Ecstatic, Ludo rushes toward Parvana and hugs her, expressing his undying love. That night, Ludo meets Melanie in the VR and she asks him to teach her how to shoot after stealing young Ludo's gun. Although he is skeptical, he finally agrees. In their home, young Ludo wakes up to an empty bed and becomes concerned about his wife's frequent night runs and goes out to the beach to look for her. Ludo and Melanie continue to practice shooting a gun for a while until they finally settle down on the beach and talk about the future. A few hours later, Melanie tells Ludo that she had to return home unaware that young Ludo had followed her there. Unable to see the other man with her, he stares at her confused about what she is doing on the beach alone. When she finally returns home, young Ludo is upset that she left in the middle of the night even though she had just been attacked. Although she apologizes for what she did, the couple ends up fighting. In the future, Ludo goes to work and is happy to find out Melanie's plan to set their friends up has worked, so Nathan and Florence are now back together again. After the group gets together, they start noticing patterns in the cases and realize that each victim must have known their murderer. After one of the detectives mentions that there might have been a creep hanging over each woman, Ludo gets upset and tells her his wife would have mentioned it. When Ludo arrives at the station for his session with Melanie, he finds out that the technician who designs the VRs is getting suspicious of his recent frequent visits. After playing it off as good police work, Ludo meets Melanie and tells her that he is worried that they might stop him from using the program and explains that they need to work faster. Ludo then asks her if there has been anyone at the time who was hanging around her too much because they believed the victims knew their murderers. Not thinking much of it, Melanie mentions that the district attorney by the name of Nicholas has been annoying her lately. Thinking there is something strange, Ludo makes plans to meet up later and goes to speak to his team. After gathering them all, Ludo convinces them to agree to look into Nicholas, who he now thought was the leading suspect. Ludo tries to follow Nicholas, but accidentally runs into Florence, who accidentally reveals Nathan had worked with one of the victims, but his partner had never mentioned it. Although he finds it strange that his friend never mentioned this, he puts the thought aside and decides to search Nicholas's office instead. Ludo searches around and is unable to find anything but a viable alibi for the man, forcing him to call off the charge against him. Ludo now has a growing suspicion of his friend and feels the need to dig deeper into the man's innocence. When he meets him at the station, he questions him about his intimate knowledge of one of the victims, but Nathan adamantly denies it. When Ludo goes back to the VR room, he checks the newly constructed imaging for his wife's case and realizes Nathan had tampered with the investigation. Noticing a new connection in the case, Ludo begins to dig deeper into the interactions the victims had with Nathan and is shocked by what he finds. Later, Ludo has a confrontation with his family and is forced to tell his wife what he is doing for Melanie. Although Parvana understands his struggle, she threatens to leave with her son if he tries to save his ex-wife because she knows it will change their whole lives. Despite feeling saddened by her decision, Ludo returns to the station to warn Melanie. In her timeline, Melanie fights with young Ludo after trying to confess why she had been distant from him. Although she tells him the truth, Ludo has a hard time believing her, but still follows her to the beach and tries to tell her she might be having hallucinations because of her recent insomnia. Angry at his mistrust, Melanie decides to leave the beach and go out for a drink, which causes her to miss Ludo from telling her who the murderer was. After having a few drinks, Melanie walks home and runs into Nathan, who offers to give her a ride home, but she refuses the gesture, telling him that she needs some time alone. After running into Nathan, Melanie decides to go to Florence's house, trying to avoid another fight. The following morning, she goes down to the beach to speak to Ludo to reveal that her killer was Nathan. Melanie is shocked by what she heard and has a hard time believing it's true, but Ludo assures her that he's right. Suddenly, Ludo begins to hear his name being called from the control room and is asked to leave the VR room. The angry chief, looking at him sternly, orders him to stay away from the case because they thought he was getting too involved. Ludo immediately knows this is Nathan's doing. Ludo tries desperately to convince his colleagues that Nathan is the culprit, but they refuse to go along with his hysteria. Angry at the police, Ludo decides to quit the force, but secretly takes Melanie's files and Nathan's mug to check for DNA. Back in her time, Melanie was scared of what was going to happen to her, so she decided to make a videotape for Ludo explaining what would happen to her. She then goes to her office and gives the tape to Florence explaining her situation, but her friend refuses to believe her, assuming that she was trying to sabotage her relationship with Nathan because she and Ludo were having trouble. Throwing the tape back in her face, Florence walks out of the office. After leaving his job at the station, Ludo goes home, having managed to swap the VR glasses. Rushing inside, he explains to Melanie what had happened and tells her that she will need to protect herself now that she already knows her attacker. Although she doesn't want to die, Melanie refuses to kill anyone to save herself and instead asks Ludo to show her their daughter. Respecting her wishes, Ludo goes down to the hospital to convince his daughter to come home with him, but she refuses, telling him he was being delusional. After returning to his car, Ludo receives a call from one of the detectives working on the case with him called Kim, who informs him that Nathan had cancelled a DNA test based on the mug he took. She explains that she found Nathan's behavior suspicious and tells him that she was going to check the man's house. As he sits in the car with a glimmer of hope, he is surprised by his daughter, who changes her mind and gets in the car. The two drive to his home and Ludo puts the glasses on his skeptical daughter, who is shocked to see her mother standing there. Although it seems strange at first, Melanie tries to connect with her daughter, but Juliet finds the moment too uncomfortable and ends the session. After Juliet runs out of the house, Ludo returns to the session and tries to comfort his dead wife. Melanie thanks him for taking good care of their daughter and tells him about the tape she was going to give to her friend Hector. The two share a loving farewell before she walks away. After she meets with Ludo, Melanie goes home and cooks a lovely dinner to make up with her husband. The two then continue to spend a passionate night together. The next morning, Melanie wakes up realizing that it was her last day and leaves Ludo in bed to deal with Nathan. After calling him to meet her, Melanie becomes frightened and shoots him in the middle of the street, but is only able to nick him. She then rushes to her friend Hector's house to give him the tape so he can pass it on to Ludo after she passes. In the future, Ludo goes over to Hector's house to ask for the tape Melanie had mentioned she had left. Hector explains that she had left with it after she confessed to shooting Nathan, which Ludo hadn't yet known. While he stood there confused, Ludo began to notice strange evidence around Hector's house, who was upstairs getting his son. In her timeline, Melanie panics at what she has done to Nathan. Hector attempts to calm her down and offers to bring her a sweater she had left with him the previous day. When Hector goes upstairs, we see him open a box full of Melanie's things that he creepily accumulated over the years, showing that he had always been the stalker. After his conversation with Hector, Ludo is now sure who his wife's killer is and rushes home to warn her. When he is rummaging around the house looking for the glasses, Parvana appears and tells him that she has destroyed them because she didn't want them to ruin their lives. Angry and considering her selfish, Ludo leaves the house after telling her that he needs to warn Nathan about Hector. In her timeline, Melanie is sitting with Hector discussing her next move. She explains that she has left her husband, leaving him with only a letter as an explanation. Finally, feeling like she is free to be his, Hector tries to kiss her, but Melanie pulls away, explaining that she isn't ready. Feeling strange about the whole situation, Melanie decides to leave, telling Hector that she doesn't want to get him involved in the crime. Hector follows her to the door and begs her to stay with him, promising that he will help her. He then confesses that he has always been in love with her since they were in high school. Hector then pulls out a box and reveals a ring that was the exact one they had found on her dead body. Melanie immediately realizes it wasn't Nathan, but Hector that was her murderer. Frightened by the sudden realization, Melanie tries to calm herself down by going to the bathroom. When Melanie takes too long in the bathroom, Hector decides to check on her, but is unable to get a response. In hopes of surviving, Melanie jumps out of the bathroom window and starts running to the beach with Hector following, yelling and asking her what was wrong. In the future, Ludo hurries to the station to apologize for what he did to Nathan and to tell him that he found the right man. Although Ludo begs him to listen, Nathan refuses and warns him that he will get fired if he continues on this case. Realizing he needs to take matters into his own hands, Ludo starts to follow Hector. When he finally catches up to him, Ludo tries to confront the man by asking why he had murdered his wife. Hector explains that he felt sorry for the man, but tells him that he had nothing to do with her death. Angry, Ludo punches and threatens that he will put him in jail for the rest of his life. Ludo then goes to the bathroom to wipe the blood off of his hands to keep as evidence. Suddenly, Hector appears behind him and tries to kill him. After the two fight for a while, Hector manages to stab Ludo in the abdomen after making a point that he had witnesses see him get attacked, leaving him to bleed out on the floor. Out on the beach in her timeline, Melanie has been chased by Hector, who follows her to the cliff. When she finds herself at the age, she takes out the gun she had been keeping and threatens him to stay away from her. Hector tries to beg her to put down the gun, but she realizes his obsession and doesn't feel safe anymore. Knowing he is lying, Melanie makes the final decision and shoots Hector in the chest. In the future, Ludo wakes up on the ground of the bathroom and finds his wounds have completely disappeared. Surprised, he hurries to his car and finds that Melanie's file is missing. Ludo then rushes home, assuming that his wife must have figured out the killer and was still alive. When he gets there and rushes inside, the house seems different from what he remembered. Hearing a female's voice, Ludo turns around expecting Melanie, but is shocked to find Parvana instead. Ludo is still happy to see his family and embraces them.